So the Justice Department's recommendations to reform laws to better protect whistleblowers are now open for public comment. It follows research and comparative analysis from various countries in the world. Whistleblower House CEO Ben Theron joins us tonight to talk more about this process. A very good evening to you, Ben. Grateful for your time. Let me get first your initial impressions of what government has put out there.
Let's be clear. Thank you for having me. Let's be clear. This is not draft legislation. It is still a discussion document. So we haven't even started the process of legislation. My first impressions are that a lot of work has gone into it. The research is comprehensive. They looked all over the world at what are different countries doing, and they've taken the best practices out of Uganda, Britain, USA, and it's all reflected in the document. Then they come forward and say, what's happening with the current legislation for Africa, and how do we overcome that and improve it? So overall, I think, well done. I must congratulate the Department of Justice on this. The research was well done, and the recommendations are solid recommendations. There are shortcomings, but at least we haven't started the legislative process, so we have an opportunity to actually talk to those as well.
And one of the key ideas put forward here, for example, is expanding the scope of the Protected Disclosures Act to beyond the relationship between employer and employee. How much wider should the scope be in order to fully speak to the issue of protecting a whistleblower in the many contexts in our country?
Well, a whistleblower could be anybody. And what the PDA said is there must be a contractual relationship in that before you can blow the whistle. Right now, anybody can see something wrong. So I can walk along the river and I can see a factory pumping poison into the river, and I can become a whistleblower. So that is a critical one. Furthermore than that, they've actually expanded it to include detrimental action by employees who could be, now we're back to employees now, who could be bullying. And a lot of time, people suffer psychologically because of the bullying that takes place.
There's also the idea of establishing a fund for the assistance of whistleblowers who we know often go through a very tough time post making a disclosure. When you look at that fund and how it would be used in this discussion document, does that then go far enough as far as covering what most whistleblowers in this country we've come to find out actually need?
There is no detail behind that. All it is one sentence that says a fund must be established. So there's a lot of logistics that need to be put in place in the legislation, in the regulations, as well as into the structure before you can do anything. So it's important that that needs to be unpacked properly. Now, bear in mind, I said there are shortcomings. We speak about, for example, the Human Rights Commission must get involved. But the question we have is the South African human rights empowered enough? Do they have enough capacity to do that? And then they speak about a very, very critical aspect. Now, the Whistleblower House over the last 15 months have dealt with whistleblowers, and 60% to 70% of whistleblowers require legal assistance before and after blowing the whistle. And the recommendation is that the Legal Aid Board must be empowered to do that. Now, if you look at South Africa, the Legal Aid Board may be too small, not capacitated enough to assist this, because there are a number of whistleblowers in the wings that need help for this as well. So it is important that if you make a recommendation, there's a lot of work behind every recommendation that needs to be done to ensure that it doesn't help you say X and you can't do X. You must capacitate the organization that you ask them to do the work for them.
Mm-hmm. And it does speak, as you're saying, this discussion document to providing both legal and emotional assistance for people who are going through legal processes related to whistleblowing. It's good and well for the Justice Department to put this forward, but whistleblowers, as you said earlier, exist in various environments. But in this country currently, some of the whistleblowers have said even the companies they work for don't have clear policies. So how do we get what the Justice Department is saying to be reflected in every environment, especially corporate and otherwise, in South Africa?
Well, the recommendation speaks about every company ought to have, and the South African Bureau of Standards, in fact, released guidelines for establishment of structures and whistleblowing, etc. There are two topics that I want to discuss before time runs out. We have very specific distinction between whistleblowers and witness protection. And what the recommendations are is that the Witness Protection Act should be broadened to include whistleblowers as well. And that's critical because at the moment, whistleblowers do not qualify for witness protection or protection at all unless you are a witness. And there are strict criteria for you to get witness protection. So what that allows now, once it's passed, is that a whistleblower can in fact be treated as a witness and get the protection required. And in South Africa, that is absolutely critical. With the high crime rate and the murders of whistleblowers, that is unacceptable.
And it speaks to another complaint from whistleblowers in this country who say that, A, they don't feel that their superiors in the workplace are people they can trust with a disclosure, and that in some cases, as we've learned, that when disclosures are made to certain people, they in fact deliberately act to block any form of justice or recourse. So until that trust has been rebuilt and ethical people are in these positions, these proposals will not be able to take full flight, will they?
No, they won't. But the act, the proposal included in here is that if any act is done to the detriment of a whistleblower, any act, the onus resides with the employer to prove that they have not acted against the whistleblower in bad faith. Up to now, it is a whistleblower's responsibility to say, I believe I've been disciplined and dismissed because I blew the whistle. The onus now will move on to the employer and the company to prove that what they did was not in retaliation for whistleblowing, and that is absolutely beautiful.
And Ben, how do you rate the protection available to whistleblowers in South Africa currently?
None. Remember, whistleblowers, I made the point earlier that you need to be a witness in a court case, and there are two criteria. The one is you need to be a witness in a court case that's enrolled in court, and the second one is that your life must be in danger. Now, if you look at South Africa right now, at the length times it gets to court, it could take 2 or 3 years. What does a whistleblower do in the meantime? Because only once it's enrolled in court can a whistleblower be placed into protection. There is no provision made for a whistleblower, just witnesses.
And the problem is that once you've gone through the legal process, you've testified, let's say a person is eventually locked up, that doesn't guarantee that you will find other employment or that your life will improve. In fact, we're hearing to the contrary, people who say what happens is other companies simply don't want to touch you. What then?
Absolutely. And there's a long way to go to convince companies that it's a long way to go for the companies to, in fact, change the mindsets. Because remember, whistleblowers don't blow the whistle purely because they want to. They are protecting the assets of the company. And it's important that companies realize that whistleblowers are an important tool in the organization that will expose and can expose corruption. And it's important that companies, and by the way, the recommendation speaks about a champion for whistleblowers. And we're hoping, once that goes through, the champion ought to be the CEO. Because if the CEO embraces and celebrates a whistleblower, the company will follow suit, and the culture inside the organization will change to embrace whistleblowing, as well as ensuring that they are celebrated and they enjoy being in the company.
Ben Theron, Executive Director at the Whistleblower House. Good to speak to you. Thank you.